Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, it's Debbie Potts doing a new episode of The Whole Athlete to talk about different techniques we can do and implement into our lifestyle to improve our performance and longevity. So today we've got Matt on the show. Today we're going to dive into blue blocking glasses, blue light, and how sleep is really important for your recovery and repair. So how can you improve your sleep is what I want to get across with you today on different tricks that we can add in easily into our routine. So Matt, thanks for coming on my show today and dive into your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So when I was in high school, I was trying to improve a lot of health issues that I was having just as essentially a kid. Gut issues, headaches, allergies. I tried diet as a follow-up to all of the standard Western protocols and procedures that had failed, as they often do, because they're just drugs and so on. And I actually had tremendous progress that I never would have expected just from changing my diet, something that a person at the age of 15 would never have realized that diet could have such a huge impact. But eventually I hit a wall and I learned about these things called mitochondria, the engines in our cells that process our food, and how the transition to an indoor lifestyle, particularly the huge exposure to artificial man-made light, and in particular, the absence of full spectrum sunlight in our body, could actually lead to a tremendous disruption of mitochondrial function by disrupting our circadian rhythm, which is our natural body sleep cycle. And so I began to change my light environment so that I could improve the function of my cellular engines, of my mitochondria, so that all the good food I was eating wouldn't be wasted. Because if you have a broken cellular engine, you could put in perfect food, but the engine is still broken, and the engine's function is what determines the health of the whole organism.
Mm-hmm. So true. And what I just said when we came on the call, that I'm researching articles, sciencey articles to talk about mitochondria and oxidative stress and ROS. And I think a lot of people and athletes, most of our listeners, don't realize the impact of cell damage they're placing on their body by training and racing, especially endurance events and, trail running, 50K races, marathons. People don't realize that it's speeding up your aging process, and how I trying to switch my focus on health coaching for athletes to look at the mitochondria function. And as I talk about performance and longevity, let's just focus on the mitochondria, because that's where our energy is made. That's where our body needs to be focused on how to optimize the mitochondria function. So talk a little bit what you tried and what worked and what didn't work, and with your own experimentation and kind of your journey that started so young.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point about chronic cardio creating the oxidative stress, damaging the mitochondria, the thing that concerns me more than that, even though that is not optimal, obviously, and many people aren't aware of the risks that they pose for themselves by doing that kind of exercise, it's more concerning to me that everyone is chronically creating the same issue in our cells and in our mitochondria by living an indoor lifestyle. For example, one place you may want to direct your research is to the impact of blue light on reactive oxygen species generation. And what's been found is that just by being indoors, I should say, blue light increases reactive oxygen species generation in the mitochondria across the board, which isn't necessarily bad if it's combined with sunlight, full spectrum sunlight, because sunlight also contains the red wavelengths that are very healing. But for example, today, most or all screen devices are based on a blue LED backlight. And anytime we're indoors behind glass is designed to filter out red and infrared light in order to make, to be more energy efficient in general, as red and infrared carry a bit more heat. And so the net result is that when we're indoors or we're on a screen device, we're getting a much bigger dose of blue light relative to the healing red wavelengths that are found in the sun. And so we're creating chronic oxidative stress in our mitochondria without exercising, just by being alive under those wavelengths of light. And so if you put it into that perspective, probably the worst thing you could possibly do for your health is run on a treadmill under fluorescent lights inside of a gym. Literally is like, it's horrible. So, you might be, for example, losing weight, but rarely, very few people even have successful weight loss from the people I know. For example, my father has been running on a treadmill in a gym every single morning for the last 15, 20 years and still can't kick off those last 20, 30 pounds. So what is happening though is chronic, like you've mentioned, oxidative damage and even depletion of the stem cell supply as the cells are basically being damaged and they need to turn themselves over. So that's a huge concern. What helped me a lot was learning particularly about the light side of things. And essentially what I mean by that is that light controls the mitochondria by controlling the circadian rhythm and our sleep cycle. So what I did was I started going out in the morning and watching the sunrise every day. This is also, an ancient Indian practice known as sun gazing, but the Western research indicates that it can be very beneficial for setting the hormone secretions of the day and setting the body's circadian rhythm. So I wake up for example, an hour before sunrise, maybe longer some days, maybe shorter some days, cook my breakfast, bring it to the beach, and I just meditate and watch the sunrise, get in the ocean, eat, and I'm a happy camper. That's what I did today and pretty much every day.
That's because you live in California.
Well, I used to live in Malibu. Now I'm living in Tulum, Mexico at the moment for the winter. And it's very sunny and warm.
Yeah, even better.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So that's one thing. The other side of things is what you referred to in the beginning, blue light blocking glasses. So I get the sunrise in the morning to turn on my brain. And then in the evening, I'll, as many evenings as possible, attempt to watch the sunset. Although it's, from my understanding, not as critical as getting the sunrise. However, the sunset's also beneficial because it sort of, as the sun goes down and the colors change, the blue light relatively is reduced in its proportion, and the brain takes that as a signal to know, okay, it's time to get ready for sleep and start making melatonin. What I do is I wear blue light blocking glasses, which essentially have a tint or a pigment in the lens, which absorbs the higher energy blue and green wavelengths. Oftentimes the more effective glasses, like the ones that I have created, also filter the green wavelengths, both of which, blue and green, are biologically active as far as our circadian rhythm goes. So these lenses absorb those wavelengths, and what passes through are the colors of fire or candles, red, orange, and yellow wavelengths. And these are significantly less active on the photoreceptors in our eye that signal to our brain to know whether it's day or night. Mm-hmm. And so just by putting on these glasses and blocking the blue wavelengths from the eye, the circadian photoreceptors in our eye, in other words, the photoreceptors that allow our brain to signal whether it's day or night, not for vision, but non-visual photoreceptors, these ones are, they're protected. And so the brain knows, okay, it's time to start preparing to go to bed. So after, I'll put them on at sunset, just after the sun goes down and people start turning all the electric lights. That's when my glasses go on. And then by about, 2 to 3 hours later, I'm really tired and ready to go to bed, even if I'm in a place with a lot of lighting. Personally, in my own abode, I will use red lights, a red light headlamp, like a hunting headlamp, to see candles that don't disrupt my circadian rhythm. And just those two changes have been tremendously substantial in helping me to sort of get over the walls that I was hitting in my use of diet to improve my health. And there's some more things, but that's a really great place to begin.
Yeah, that's why I kind of, 2015, 2014, I put together this holistic method to really transform the whole athlete from the inside out, that you need to work on not just changing what we eat. And as I keep talking about every show, it's when we eat, how we eat it, why we eat it, not just changing the foods you're eating. So there's so much more to that. But then the exercise and everything's kind of the Goldilocks effect. Not too much, not too little, finding that right amount that works for you. But then also talking about the sleep, and stress is always my big topic, and digestion, gut health, and hydration, happiness is a huge part. But I think, experimenting as you did and realizing, just getting outside and helping that sleep wake cycle, your circadian rhythm, you're doing it naturally. As I say, when people go camping and they have no electricity so they can reset their own circadian rhythm. And then, going back to life, it's going to probably get dysfunctional again because they go back to being on their screens, watching TV. And as you said, no one goes outside anymore, especially I'm up in Seattle and it's January and people just train inside and then they go to their car and then they go to their office and then they go to their car to go home. And so then no one's ever outside. So I think there's so much lack of vitamin D and getting that grounding. And it's so nice to, talk about ways that we could go watch a sunset and sunrise, but what would you suggest doing for people that are in different parts of the world and have a different schedule? What can they do to improve their sleep and circadian rhythm?
It's a great question. So I'm glad you brought up Seattle as a very cloudy and rainy place most of the year. I get a lot of questions
half the year. We
about
have a bad reputation. It's not rainy every day.
Half the year, let's say. So if one considers a Native American or a Native person who would be living in that region of the world, I believe maybe it was the Tacoma tribe, or I don't recall the name of the tribe, but nonetheless, they would have spent all of their time outdoors. Indoor living really wasn't a choice. It didn't even exist as a concept until probably post Middle Ages Europe, because even in the Middle Ages, they lived in shacks and huts essentially, unless they were the kings, who would, by the way they lived indoors and covered in clothing, would be the ones to get the fattest of all the people.
I read that.
The others were totally malnourished. They just ate bread, but they would be outdoors all day cultivating their land. So they did have at least that to their benefit, besides being malnourished. So if we consider the Native Americans too, they would have been outdoors all day long. It wasn't a choice. And so even though they're not in direct sunlight without clouds, they're still getting the actual light and the full spectrum of the sun. And that's really what's important. And that's the part that people sometimes miss, is when I talk about what I teach about called the light diet, which is a diet of our light environment. People think, oh, if it's cloudy, then I can't get any benefit. But that's not true. It's really good just to get outside. So the best way to answer your question would be to, from my perspective, say the extent to which we will have optimal health in many ways is the extent to which we can spend more time outside. And so for anyone you're referring to as a different schedule or live somewhere else where it's dark a lot of the time, just get outside as many hours of the day as you can while the light is up, and you will gain benefits just from doing that, especially if you combine it with some healthy, non-chronically stressful exercise, whether it's brief sprints, weightlifting, movement, yoga, walking, swimming. Getting in cold water is particularly beneficial for the cells in a whole number of other ways, because it activates the uncoupling proteins in the mitochondria, causes the mitochondria to burn fat as heat, so it stimulates our internal fat burning processes. And then the infrared light, also known as heat, that the mitochondria release, acts to affect the structure of the water around the mitochondria based on some pretty interesting research. And this causes the water to become structured. Maybe you've heard of structured water and fourth phase water. Mm-hmm. And so by getting into cold water, we're turning on our inner fire, as Wim Hof, the Iceman, calls it, our inner heat generation systems, which it positively affects the water in our cells, making us more energy efficient. And this is why just jumping in a cold lake or a cold river, you come out and you're just supercharged. So just more time outdoors. And if someone works a day job where they can't get outdoors, they have to just realize that that is a trade-off that one's choosing to make. There's a trade-off of health in that, and it cannot be exempt from the rules of how the body works.
Well, I always think people have a choice. You're not able to get outside during work day. People choose to, I have too much to do. I got to work through it. I can't take a lunch break, and they eat at their desk and multitask and cause digestion problems with that and eating crappy food. But then, they're not going outside and getting out to daylight at all. So they never even see maybe the sun when it is up this time of year. But, going back to weight gain, I think is a great topic, because I think I read a lot in these Facebook group pages and try to respond to some of the questions once a week on this keto for beginners and all these people doing keto and trying to be fat adapted. And I always say N equals 1, everyone's different. And so many people like, oh, I lost 30 pounds in a month. And I Some people, oh my gosh, I lost 1 pound in 2 weeks. What's wrong? And I always think that people need to look at, all these other elements as we are discussing, but that maybe they just need to get outside. I told someone the other day, it's like, well, what are you not doing? You're changing what you're eating, and a lot of them eating dirty ketos, is a bunch of processed junk food anyways, but they don't do the lifestyle habits. A lot of people aren't looking at exercise and movement, mobility, daylight, sun exposure, sunrise, sunset. And how have you found in your research and your experience, and you talked about your dad, how people struggle with fat loss and just can't lose weight even though they change what they're eating?
Absolutely. There's a hormone called leptin, which is secreted by our fat mass, which signals to the hypothalamus in the brain, which is the master energy accountant and regulator of the entire body, the hypothalamus. And when we are in primarily an indoor lifestyle under artificial light, the leptin that is secreted by our fat mass is not of the same quality as that which is exposed to sun when we have our skin exposed to the sun, which we're designed to, at least for many months of the year as wild natural humans. So just by not having adequate sun exposure to our skin and on our fat mass in particular, which sits right below the skin, at least the subcutaneous fat, the quality of the leptin which is generated is not as, let's say, effective when it reaches the hypothalamus in signaling its energy balance, the body's energy balance. And so this would lead, would lead one to be more, how can I say, desirous of consuming excessive quantities of food. Another interesting bit about leptin, again, which is the master regulatory hormone for energy balance. And if leptin is damaged in any way, in particular leptin sensitivity of our hypothalamus, if it can't properly register and receive the signal that the fat is sending, saying, let's say the fat is essentially saying, we have 100 units of energy, so you need to eat more or eat less if you have too much. That's really what the hypothalamus does, or I should say leptin acting on the hypothalamus. So if there's any issue in that process, people will want to consume more and then they'll eat more. And then because they're leptin resistant, they're not going to be able to get that satiety signal. They're going to constantly want to eat more and more and more. Another issue is that artificial blue light exposure, especially at night, disrupts that natural sleep process, which a key part of which is leptin signaling to the hypothalamus what our energy balance is, our energy stores, and our fat mass contains. So just by being exposed to artificial light into the evening up until the time we go to bed looking at the cell phone, we're disrupting the proper function of the energy accounting systems in our body. And this is going to lead to the body feeling like it's starved for energy, even if it has more than enough fat. So the brain is going to signal to eat more and more and more. Essentially, I thought it was fascinating at first. I never had weight issues myself, although actually I was underweight when I first got into this stuff. I was never overweight. But underweight is also a very common issue, especially among younger generations from what I've seen. Many, many people are just very skinny. Very few people have a healthy, what we would consider a healthy body composition, muscular, and so on. Any issues in leptin are going to cause, serious issues overall. And that's, it also affects our ability to repair our brain. But just in that one simple way, the absence of sunlight and the excess of artificial light can really disrupt our natural energy accounting. And there's others, but that's a very primary way. One thing I would add is that anyone who's been in sunlight, for example, in a hot climate, you can generally automatically feel that your appetite is reduced even within just a few days of being in the sun. And this is because the body is actually, and this might sound woo-woo, but there's plenty of scientific research about it, the body's actually able to gain energy directly from the sun. I mean, it's no surprise. We have these all cell membranes and all sorts of photoreceptors in our skin that allow us to assimilate light. And even now, there's tons of evidence behind red light therapy, photobiomodulation, allowing the body to generate more ATP in the mitochondria just by being exposed to red and infrared light, of which the sun contains a tremendous, tremendous amount. So just by sunbathing myself, and sun gazing in the morning, I have found that I crave significantly less food than I ever did before, because I'm able to get energy from the source. I don't need to eat this heavy matter to get the energy, which is ultimately from the sun nonetheless. So that's sort of how the sun plays a key role in regulating.
And that must impact your mitochondria then too. If your mitochondria create energy, I wonder what that link is between the two. You're getting energy from the sun, but how does that create energy in your body? And if it's making energy, or it's the leptin sensitivity that's working as well. So you have that sense of fullness and satiety, but you're creating energy for the mitochondria. So it must be coming from that whole process somehow.
There's multiple ways. Yeah. One would be direct to the mitochondria. So when the light, red and infrared, are able to penetrate very deep through the skin, whereas ultraviolet and, for example, ultraviolet is blocked out by the surface of our skin because it can be much more damaging and oxidative, but little tiny bits we do need of ultraviolet to make vitamin D and so on, because it's a very powerful wavelength of light. So it's able to do things that other wavelengths can't do, such as, again, lead to the stimulus of vitamin D, or the generation of vitamin D. But so when that red and infrared gets down to our mitochondria, it essentially improves their energy efficiency just by acting on the cytochromes. One in particular is cytochrome C oxidase. Mm-hmm. Red light acting on cytochrome C oxidase simply makes it more efficient based on the research at tunneling electrons and basically in allowing the body to make ATP. And so this is why companies like Juve are able to really market their devices, because they help if someone's living an indoor lifestyle. So that would be direct, the light affecting the mitochondria directly, but then others would be, let's say, indirect, affecting for example, our circadian rhythm, our sleep, and then our body's hormonal accounting systems that affect our appetite on a day-to-day basis. So it's direct and indirect.
You're smart. How do you know all this? What do you have different mentors that taught you, and you just researched on your own?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have learned a lot from a lot of different people, but one person I would recommend people attempt to read is Dr. Jack Kruse. Mm-hmm. He's a neurosurgeon from the Gulf South, and he was previously affiliated with the paleo community, but attempted to explain why this mitochondrial focus and therefore our indoor lifestyle is very relevant. For example, saying something like, if you eat a paleo diet, but you live a modern indoor lifestyle, your engines and mitochondria are still going to be damaged, and therefore you're not going to be able to achieve optimal health. And he sort of uses a catchphrase, light is more important than food for health, which is to some extent a subjective way of putting it, but nonetheless, the idea is still there. If you live an indoor lifestyle, your cellular engines and your sleep are going to be damaged and reduced in function, and therefore you're not going to be able to utilize even the healthiest diet to achieve optimal health. You won't be able to reach optimal health if you're living an indoor lifestyle, no matter what diet you eat. So that he was really one of the biggest influences I've had. But more recently, I've been able to have the pleasure of learning from different, for example, Ayurvedic and Eastern mentors, let's say, a lot of which just reaffirms some of what Dr. Kruse and other Western researchers have been finding, the benefits of sun gazing, not eating meals after 5 p.m. or late in the evening, avoiding bright artificial light exposure at night, and these sorts of things.
I love this information. It's just so fun to research, and I get stuck going down these rabbit holes. You're like, okay, how does that work? And then I was doing this other day, and I have to always catch myself when I start researching or trying to learn some more information, because I always want to know why and understand everything. And then you just kind of keep going. There's so much. But I found this book I have this book I still have to read, Mitochondria and the Future of Medicine by Dr. Lee No. Have you heard of him? This one?
I believe that I have that book. I have not read it yet.
It's a little heavy reading when I read at nighttime. It's like difficult to read these more in-depth books, sciencey books. And then I love what Ari Whitten has been sharing. If you follow him on the Energy Blueprint, it's pretty fascinating too, because I think so many people, as in my background with chronic stress and not, I haven't been able to I did Ironmans for years and haven't been able to race since 2013, is that I think it's more mitochondria function versus saying it's always adrenal issues, which is, HPA axis function. I think it's just this whole combination of stressors, from external environmental stressors, but also internal hidden stressors. We say we do functional lab testing, identify those, but it's just so much and why I looking at the whole athlete, the whole individual, to really get healthy, not just what you're doing for your exercise routine or doing low carb and, what they're eating. So I think you're really on to something. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show to talk about, how you can improve your performance longevity by waking up watching the sunrise and sunset. So let's go into one more question on recovery and repair happens, importance of sleep, and how we can improve recovery and repair by kind of going backwards on that concept that we have to have quality deep sleep, and how we get quality deep sleep from the blue light exposure, and go into kind of the blue blocker glasses. So
absolutely. As most people know, sleep is the time when we repair our cells, and good research has indicated that it's our primordial state. In other words, bacteria and animal or organisms such as bacteria are in what we might consider a perpetual state of sleep, and that consciousness and wakefulness and activity and movement, which we exist in often half of the day or a little bit more, is actually an evolved state. But sleep is the primordial time for repair and whatnot. That's really good to keep in mind, that our wakefulness isn't necessarily the key piece of our existence. With that being said, sleep is the time we repair, and the key molecule for repair during sleep, which many people may be familiar with, is melatonin. Melatonin is generated by the pineal gland, but also by many different other glands and organs. And even there is some research to indicate that it's also generated by the mitochondria itself, because melatonin, wherever it's generated, it is used up in that area. And therefore, because every single cell and mitochondria in particular need melatonin to repair, it would make sense that there are some systems for it to be produced throughout the body. Nonetheless, so the secretion of melatonin is diurnal, meaning that it occurs in, or I should say it's not diurnal, but it occurs in a diurnal rhythm or a circadian rhythm. So when we're awake during the day and we're exposed to, blue light from the sun, we do not have any more secretion of melatonin. Essentially, the brain turns on, we secrete cortisol in the morning and so on to wake up, and then melatonin secretion slows down or stops and brings us out of that sort of dreamy state. It's interesting, even Eastern researchers and Eastern philosophers discuss or describe melatonin as a molecule of different levels of consciousness, and the pineal gland, which secretes a lot of melatonin, as the third eye. And so having elevated levels of melatonin also allows one to achieve higher levels of consciousness in some ways, meditating in the early morning or late in the evening. But anyhow, so as far as the physiologic and exercise and regeneration effects go, by repairing the oxidative damage and oxidative stress across the body, melatonin allows us to basically get ever so slightly closer to birth every night rather than closer to death. And what I mean by that is if someone can see my hands, I don't know if this will be video as well, but essentially, yeah, so just audio. My two hands are up. One side is birth, one side is death. When we're born, we're obviously on the birth side. And when we are awake during the day, we get a little closer towards death. And then when we sleep, we repair so that we go a little closer back towards birth. But the accrual or accumulation of that damage that we're not able to repair every day is what leads us essentially to death. And melatonin is the key molecule in getting us a little bit closer towards birth while we sleep and repair every night. The big issue is that anyone who's exposed to artificial light, in particular the blue wavelengths and artificial light in the modern world, is having a significant reduction in their melatonin production and secretion. Some studies showing just 50%, others showing up to 100% reduction in melatonin, or 96% reduction, depending on the number of hours and the type of the light that we're exposed to. And therefore, we're over time significantly damaging our health and reducing the repair. And again, because melatonin is the number one most potent antioxidant molecule in the entire body and anti-cancer, anti-aging. By reducing our levels just by being exposed to artificial light every night after the sun goes down, and even during the day, if we're exposed to these blue-based fluorescent and LED lights and screens, we're also damaging the precursors and things that lead up to the secretion of melatonin, essentially zapping our brain or frying our brain, as my grandparents would call it. we're never going to be able to achieve optimal health or optimal performance if we're living a life like that. So it's really essential to avoid that light throughout the day and especially at night to be able to secrete melatonin properly in the evening. And then in the morning, it's also really essential for everyone to get at least some light exposure, because that stimulates the brain to begin producing serotonin, which is a precursor for melatonin. And we need that to be there so that we can generate the melatonin in the evening at the right time and repair and heal.
That's a rabbit hole I was going down the other day on how to improve serotonin, because it's made tryptophan you need, and you want serotonin made in your gut, and you have to have proper protein digestion, and just this whole, impacts of making melatonin, working everything backwards. So if melatonin made from serotonin makes into melatonin, but serotonin is made from tryptophan, but you need tryptophan, you needed some carbs and have that at night. And I was just like, okay, what if you don't want carbs at night? And so it's just really interesting when you can waste hours on lose hours, not waste them, lose hours on researching on Google these things. Like, all right, how does that work if we want to improve our body making serotonin? So anyways, I wanted to also say, a lot of people think they don't need to wear blue blocker glasses at night because they have the new screens on their computers, and Apple phones, for example, have those dimmer switches and the different, the screens that you can change at nighttime. Have you found those to be effective? I know you sell these great stylish looking blue blocker glasses, but I think they're still, I just don't trust the screens on a computer. You're still looking at a screen, but I would think the glasses are still needed, even though there's devices to lower that blue light.
It's a great question. So blue light doesn't come just from screens. It also comes from all the ambient artificial light sources we use. So anyone should just ask themselves the question, am I exposed to light at night besides my screens if they are all optimized? And the answer will be, unless someone lives in the woods or a cave, the answer will be yes, 100% of the time. Meaning, are you exposed to street lights? Are you exposed to car headlights? Are you exposed to the lights in your kitchen? Are you exposed to the lights in your refrigerator? If so, they're going to disrupt your circadian rhythm and your proper melatonin secretion. To answer your question, the lights from the screens are, they're pretty good. The software, I just picked up my phone here, and just to show that there's this on iPhones, which is very commonly used, there's a night shift mode, which, people aren't looking at the video anyway, but there's a night shift mode, which reduces the blue light by about 75%. And then if anyone wants to Google how to make your phone screen red, I'll just show you. You can actually make the screen red, reducing 95% of the blue light. And that's very, very handy, and a lot of the green. But even then, when looking at screens, the glasses are still necessary because the backlight is still kicking off some blue light, which our brain will be sensitive to, but it's not hugely significant. The more significant exposure at night would be ambient lighting from any sources that are present. So that's why in my house, I'll just use red and candle lights, because the red, orange, and yellows do not affect the circadian rhythm nearly as much as blue and green.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's summarize the top ways to improve our quality of sleep each night.
Yeah, the best is just as being outdoors as much as possible during the morning hours and throughout the day. That's absolutely number one across the board, because we can generate, when the body's pretty amazing, and when we're in nature, it's as amazing as it should be in general. Things will happen the way they're supposed to. The production of serotonin, melatonin, all these things will happen properly if we live in our natural environment that we've lived in for a long time. But if we live in the modern world in a city where we're being zapped, like you mentioned, by wireless radiation, which affects the calcium channels and all kinds of other things in the body, then we might not be able to do everything properly. So that has to be kept in mind too. If you're outside but you're in a big city, you're also going to potentially have issues. But getting outdoors as much as possible throughout the morning. Then, in particular, being outdoors in the late morning or middle of the day can be beneficial as well, especially if you're in a sunny place, to get a bit more of the ultraviolet wavelengths, because these are essential in essentially catalyzing certain reactions in the brain. There's research to show that ultraviolet exposure is very important for speeding up and optimizing the production of, the synthesis of serotonin from tryptophan. And so on. And likewise, dopamine from tyrosine. These just light actually improves the efficacy of these processes in our body as it does with many other things like blood flow and so on. So that's very important. Little bit more late morning, midday sun exposure when the sun's a little stronger beyond just the early morning, but only a little bit is necessary. 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes tops, depending on one's skin tan and skin type. If someone has African or, Latino skin, then more might be necessary because they have more melanin to protect from that sun, but they're no longer maybe in that environment if they live in North America or Europe. Then, of course, wearing blue light blocking glasses in the evening is another really great benefit. And other things that one could consider, and just to actually close that point, would be one would want to put these glasses on the moment the sun goes down and then keep them on until the time that one goes to bed so that there's a proper darkness period. And ideally, turn down the lights in the house, use candles, use red lights, get old style Thomas Edison incandescent bulbs, the ones they use in all the restaurants now, but not the LED kind, the old incandescent ones that get real hot and warm. They're much dimmer than most lights. They have significantly less blue, or just plain orange or red lights in a house would be great as well. And those 3 things are pretty much a really good start, a really, really good start.
Lots of great information that hopefully everyone can implement into their life today. So go outside right now if you haven't been outside. And I'll put everything in the show notes, but link to your website. Do you want to tell everyone where to go to find more about you and your products?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram personally, where I'll have more information coming up over the next few months, I am The Light Diet. So that's where people can find me personally. And then as far as my business goes, it's called Ra Optics. Ra is the Egyptian god of sun and healing and medicine, ancient Egyptian. And that is raoptics.com. And then on Instagram, we are RA_optics, Ra Optics. So those are the best places people can go ahead and find us in general, and me.
Great. And can we share how old you are or how you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm 20 years old. And so I've been it's funny because there were people who were kings by the time they were 20 in previous times. So I don't think of it as any sort of limitation, although some people will think, oh, well, I shouldn't listen to any of that. But the people who I've learned from, whose work I'm simplifying, are significantly older than me. They've lived lifetimes. So I'm just doing the best to translate the work of real experts like, I should not just real, but I should say extremely experienced experts like Dr. Kruse and many others into Dr. Douglas Wallace is a big mitochondrial researcher I'd recommend you look into if you haven't heard of him. His work has essentially shown that the cause of the modern chronic diseases is mitochondrial dysfunction. But anyhow, I've been doing this, reading and all this stuff for 6-7 years now. So,
So is Sim Land, you're like hip metabolic autophagy guy. Have you heard of Sim Land?
Yeah. He's a good friend. I'll be speaking with him next week for a podcast as well.
Oh, great. Yeah. You guys are both young, brilliant people. You're like a young Ben Greenfield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I have the pleasure of being able to learn from Ben as well. And, so.
Yeah, so much. I've done 2 of his coaching programs, and it's just like so much information. I can never remember everything, but I just have all these resources. So, we dive into those different topics in the Keon Coach program. And back in 2012, we did the Superhuman Coach program going into all that. So it really brightens up your knowledge of all different areas, how it's not just exercising more and eating less. There's so much more to being healthy. So I thank you for sharing the passion, and just the whole mitochondria issue, I think is something we really will focus on more in my podcast this year. Just keep diving into more.
Awesome.
I think it's huge. So I'm all about
I'll
it.
reach out to you if I have any more information. I think, sure. I'll just throw one more point for your listeners is, as someone who's been living this lifestyle for so long, it's so natural to me to be outdoors as many hours of the day as possible. And even when I'm indoors, I open up the blinds and let the full spectrum pass through, because windows filter that. I open up the windows, I should say, even if the screen is still closed. But I meet people on an occasional basis, because often I'm just secluded doing my work, and I realize, oh my gosh, even though this is so natural for me, the majority of people in the world have never heard of this, and they're really suffering for it, really, really suffering for it. So I highly recommend that people, just try this out, get a little more sunlight so that the parts of the brain that are sleeping can start to turn on, and then we can start to function, significantly at higher levels.
Well, I'm speaking on Jimmy Moore's low carb cruise this May, and then at KetoCon this June. So I will pick your brain later and get you some info to add into my presentation on performance longevity, because it's all going to be about mitochondria and the holistic method is what it'll come to, but it's all mitochondria is the holistic method. So
that'll be awesome. Yeah, I'd love to chat. It'll be great.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.